there is a village you have never visited, but somehow you already know what it feels like. It sits on the eastern slope of the Mount of Olives, just a short walk from Jerusalem, close enough to hear the city's noise on a busy afternoon, far enough to feel like a different world entirely when the sun goes down. The village is called Bethany. In the language of those who lived there, the name carried the quiet meaning of a house of figs, or perhaps a house of poverty. Historians still gently disagree. But what everyone who passed through seemed to agree on was this: Bethany felt like a place where people actually lived, not performed, not competed, just lived. Tonight, let yourself arrive there slowly. Before we meet anyone, before any conversation begins, just let the village come into focus, the way your eyes adjust when you step from a bright room into a softer, darker one. Let it take a moment. There is no hurry here. The hour is somewhere between late afternoon and early evening. That golden, unhurried time when the day has not quite finished, but has already begun to exhale. The sun is low and wide over the Judean hills, and the light it throws across the landscape is the color of warm bread, of honey left in a clay jar, of the inside of your eyelids when you close your eyes and face upward towards something gentle. The olive trees that line the paths into Bethany are old, older than anyone in the village can remember. Their trunks are thick and twisted in the way that only centuries of slow, patient growing can produce. Not broken, just shaped by time, by wind, by the particular weight of their own branches. Their leaves catch the last of the daylight and turn it silver on one side, dusty green on the other, flickering softly whenever the evening breeze moves through them. If you have ever stood beneath an old olive tree and simply looked up, you will know the kind of quiet that produces. It is the quiet that slows your breathing without asking you to. Along the dirt paths, the stones are worn smooth. Generations of sandaled feet have done that. Farmers returning from their fields, children running ahead of their mothers, travelers coming down from Jerusalem with the dust of the city still on their robes. The paths wind between low stone walls, and on the other side of those walls are small gardens, fig trees heavy with late-season fruit, patches of herbs whose names you might not know, but whose smell you would recognize immediately as something ancient and clean. And here and there a vine, its tendrils curling loosely around whatever they can reach, the way living things do when they are simply trying to find their way. The air in Bethany in the evening carries something that is difficult to name precisely. It is the smell of cooking fires beginning, the particular smoke of dried olive wood, which is not sharp or unpleasant, but has a roundness to it, almost sweet. The kind of smell that means someone somewhere is preparing a meal and expecting people they love to sit down and eat it. It is the smell of the earth releasing the warmth it has held all day. A slow exhale from the ground itself. And beneath all of that, faintly, the smell of night coming. That cool, clean approach of darkness that you can sense before you can see it. The way you can feel rain before it falls. The village is settling into its evening rhythm. A woman carries a water jug back from the well, balancing it with the practiced ease of someone who has done this 10,000 times and no longer thinks about it. Two old men sit on a low wall near the village entrance, talking slowly about something. Their conversation punctuated by long, comfortable silences, the way old friendships always are. A few children are still outside, but they are beginning to drift toward their homes, pulled by the smell of food and the sound of their mothers' voices, calling their names in that particular tone that means now. Not in a moment. Now. Somewhere nearby. A dog is sleeping in the last warm patch of sunlight before it disappears entirely behind the hills. This is the world that two sisters have always known. Their house is not the largest in Bethany, and not the smallest. It is a home that has been lived in for a long time. You can tell by the way the threshold stone is worn, by the small repairs made to the outer wall over the years with slightly different colored stones, by the clay pots lined up near the door in an arrangement that is completely practical and somehow also completely personal. Someone who cares about order lives here. Someone who cares about warmth lives here too. Her name is Martha. She is the older sister, and she has been running this household since long before she was old enough to call herself its head. She learned to cook the way her mother cooked, and then she improved upon it, because that is the kind of person she is. Someone who does not simply maintain things, but quietly, persistently makes them better. She knows where everything is. She knows what needs doing before it announces itself as needing doing. She has a kind of forward-looking awareness that means she is always already thinking 3 steps ahead of the present moment. If you had met Martha on a normal afternoon, you would have liked her immediately. She has the energy of someone who is genuinely glad to be useful, who finds deep satisfaction in a clean floor, a full table, a guest made comfortable. There is nothing resentful or reluctant in her service. Not usually. Anyway, she gives because she loves, and she works because she cares. And for most of her life, those two things have felt like the same thing. But here is something that Martha herself might not have been able to tell you if you had asked. Underneath all that doing, all that preparing and providing and making sure, there is a quiet ache. Not a dramatic one. Not the kind that announces itself loudly or demands attention. Just a low, persistent feeling. Like a door somewhere in the house that never quite closes all the way. That lets in a thin draft, no matter how many times you press it shut. A feeling that even when everything is done, even when the meal is ready and the guests are comfortable and the evening is as it should be, something small is still missing. Some conversation she never quite got to have. Some moment of stillness she never quite allowed herself to sit in. She does not dwell on this feeling. She is too busy for that. Her younger sister's name is Mary. If Martha is the house's hands, Mary is something harder to describe. She is the one who watches, the one who notices the quality of light in the late afternoon and pauses to look at it, even when there are other things to be done. The one who remembers, years later, not the details of an event, but how it felt to be in the room during it. The atmosphere, the particular quality of a silence, the expression on someone's face in a moment they did not know anyone was looking. Mary has spent most of her life being gently misunderstood by people who are not quite sure what to do with her particular kind of presence. She is not lazy. She is not checked out or indifferent. She simply operates at a different speed than the world usually asks of her. A deeper, slower rhythm. The kind that hears things that faster-moving people walk right past. She loves her sister with the specific love of someone who has grown up beside another person through everything that growing up involves. The difficult years, the grief, the ordinary Tuesdays, the inside jokes that no one else would find funny. She knows Martha's goodness completely. She also knows, with the quiet certainty that comes from years of close observation, that her sister sometimes works so hard at loving that she forgets to simply be loved. Mary worries about this in her own quiet way. And there is Lazarus. He is their brother, the third member of this small family. And the village knows him as a good man in the uncomplicated sense. Kind to his neighbors, honest in his dealings, faithful in the way that does not make a performance of itself. He is not a dramatic figure. He does not appear in many stories. But in this house, he is the steady warmth at the center of things, the one whose presence makes the space feel complete, whose laugh you can hear from the garden when something genuinely strikes him as funny. The three of them have made a life here in Bethany that is ordinary in all the right ways, full of the textures and rhythms and small recurring pleasures that make up most of what any human life actually is, underneath whatever larger events are happening around it. They eat together. They argue gently about small things and let it go. They know each other's habits and honor them. They have survived grief already, together, and the surviving has made them close in the particular way that shared difficulty does. And they love Jesus. Not in an abstract theological sense, but in the specific, personal, you are welcome at our table sense. He has been to this house before. More than once. He knows which corner of the room has the best light in the morning. He knows how Martha takes her bread and what makes Lazarus laugh. He knows the sound of this house when it is settled and at peace. When word goes out that he is coming again, Martha begins to prepare. Because that is what Martha does. And because the preparing is real love, expressed in the only language she has always fully trusted. Mary simply waits. Because that is what Mary does. And her waiting is just as real and just as full. Tonight, as the stars begin to appear above Bethany, first one, then three, then suddenly too many to count. The way the night sky always seems to cross some invisible threshold between sparse and infinite, The village grows quiet in the way that ancient places know how to grow quiet. The cooking fires settle into their steady glow. The last conversations of the evening wind down to murmurs, then to silence. Somewhere in a small house near the edge of the village, two sisters are sitting in the last of the firelight. And somewhere on the road that winds down from Galilee, someone is walking toward them. He is not hurrying. He never hurries. But he is coming. And that, for now, is enough. Let that image rest with you for a moment. That small house, that warm fire, those two women sitting together in the way that people who love each other sit together when they are not performing anything for anyone. Just present. Just there. If your body is already beginning to grow heavy, let it. If your thoughts are beginning to slow and soften at the edges the way thoughts do when sleep is approaching, that is exactly right. You do not need to hold on to every detail. The story will still be here when you return to it. For now, just be in Bethany for a moment longer. Listen to the wind move through the olive trees. Feel the warmth of a fire that has been burning all evening. And rest. He arrived in the late afternoon. That is the way it usually happened with Jesus. Not announced in advance with enough time to feel fully prepared, but with just enough warning that you knew he was coming, which was somehow both better and worse than a complete surprise. Better, because you could light the lamps and set out the cushions and make sure there was enough bread. Worse, because the knowing gave you time to start thinking about everything that still needed doing. And the list, once you started it, had a way of growing faster than any afternoon could contain. Martha had been up since before the sun. This was not unusual for her. She was the kind of person whose eyes opened before her mind fully caught up, already moving toward the day's first task before she had quite decided to be awake. But this particular morning had a different quality to it, a sharpened alertness, a particular attention to detail that went beyond her ordinary thoroughness. She had checked the bread twice. She had swept the courtyard once, then noticed a corner she had missed, and swept it again. She had rearranged the cushions near the low table, decided they looked fine, rearranged them once more, and then stood back and looked at the room with the particular expression of someone who is trying to see it the way a guest would see it. Through fresh eyes, from the doorway. She wanted everything to be right. Not perfect in the cold, distant way of someone performing for an audience. Martha was never that. But right in the warm, generous way of someone who believes that the quality of your preparation is a measure of the quality of your love. Every clean surface was a sentence in a letter she did not know how to write any other way. Every dish prepared with care was something she meant sincerely, offered from the deepest place in her that knew how to give. This was how Martha loved. With her hands, with her attention, with the full weight of her capable and tireless self. Mary spent the morning differently. She had helped. She always helped, because she was not indifferent to the work or to her sister's effort. She had ground grain and carried water and done the things that needed doing without complaint. But there was a quality to her helping that was subtly different from Martha's. The way two musicians can play the same piece of music and produce something that sounds similar but feels entirely different depending on where their attention is while they play. Mary's attention this morning was somewhere else. Not distracted in the scattered, restless sense. More like oriented, pointed towards something just beyond the immediate tasks. The way a plant turns toward a light source without being asked to, without deciding to, simply because that is what it is built to do. She kept pausing at the doorway, looking down the road that wound into the village from the north. Not anxiously, just attentively. The way you watch for someone you have been looking forward to seeing for a long time. Not because you are worried they will not come, but because you want to be paying attention when they do. Martha noticed this, as she noticed most things. She did not say anything yet. There was still too much to do, and the afternoon was already shorter than she needed it to be. He came with a small group of his disciples, dusty from the road, quieter than you might expect, in the way that people get quiet after they have been walking for many hours through open country and have run through most of what they had to say to each other and settled into a companionable silence. They were tired. Most of them. You could see it in the way they moved. The slight looseness in their shoulders. The grateful way they accepted the water that Martha immediately and efficiently appeared with before they had quite crossed the threshold. But Jesus himself did not look tired in the same way. He looked the way he often looked, which was difficult to describe precisely because it was not quite like anything else you had seen in another person's face. A quality of being fully present, fully here, not distracted by where he had just been or where he was going next. His eyes, when they met yours, had the effect of making you feel that you were the only person in the room, and also, somehow, that the room itself had become slightly more real than it was a moment before. He greeted Martha with warmth and genuine appreciation. He meant it. All of it. He saw her, recognized her effort, received her hospitality with the fullness of attention that made hospitality feel worthwhile. And then he settled into the place that felt most natural, which was somewhere near the center of the room, but close to the floor. In the way that people sit when they are not trying to occupy space so much as simply be in it. The disciples found places along the walls, ate bread, drank water, let the road tiredness begin to ease out of their limbs. And Mary sat down near Jesus, not beside him exactly, slightly below him, at his feet. The posture of a student, the posture of someone who has found the thing they were looking for and has no desire to be anywhere else. She sat with her hands folded loosely in her lap and her face turned toward him with an attention that was total and still and entirely unself-conscious. She was listening, not just with her ears, with everything. Martha saw this from across the room, and something shifted in her. Small at first, the way a stone shifts at the edge of a stream, barely perceptible. And then suddenly the current has changed. She understood the impulse. She did. Some part of her recognized what her sister was doing and knew the name of it. But the meal was not ready. The guests were more than she had prepared for this morning when she had first counted cushions. The bread needed watching, and the lentils needed another handful of herbs. And there were cups that had not been filled. And she was the only one who seemed to notice any of this, because she was the only one doing anything about it. And her sister was sitting there, just sitting there. In the middle of all of it, the feeling grew warmer. Not quite anger. Something closer to loneliness. Actually, if she had been able to name it clearly. The loneliness of being the only one moving in a room full of still people. The loneliness of loving in a language that requires constant effort. And wondering, just for a moment, if that effort is something anyone sees. If it counts. If being useful and being loved are actually the same thing. Or if somewhere along the way she has quietly confused them. She carried 3 more cups to the table. She stirred the lentils. She checked the bread. And the feeling did not go away. She did not mean to say it the way she said it. She would have told you that. Afterward, if you had asked her. She did not mean for her voice to carry the edge it carried when she stopped at the edge of the room and looked toward Jesus with the full weight of her exhausted, well-meaning, slightly unraveling self, and said, "Lord, don't you care that my sister has left me to do all this work alone? Tell her to come and help me." The room went quiet in that particular way, that rooms go quiet when something honest has been said. The kind of honest that makes everyone slightly uncomfortable, because everyone has felt it, and no one usually says it. Mary did not move. Jesus looked at Martha, and his expression, this is the part that is worth sitting with, was not disapproving. Not disappointed in the cold way of someone who has found you falling short of a standard. Not distant or corrective in the way of a teacher who has caught a student doing something wrong. He looked at her the way someone looks at a person they love when that person is suffering in a way they cannot quite see yet themselves. He said her name twice. Martha. Martha. When someone says your name twice like that, slowly, with that quality of full attention, it does something to the defensive architecture you have built around the most tender part of yourself. It finds a way through. Not because it forces anything, but because it is simply too gentle to be kept out. You are worried and troubled about many things, he said, but only one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. Sit with those words for a moment, because they were not unkind, even though they might sound that way at first. He did not say that Martha's work was worthless. He did not say that the meal did not matter, or that hospitality was not a form of love. He did not dismiss the effort, or the love behind the effort. He saw it all, received it all, appreciated it fully. What he said was something gentler and more difficult than any criticism. You are carrying more than you need to be carrying right now. Not because you are wrong to serve, but because the anxiety has climbed inside the serving and made it heavier than it has to be. The worry has gotten into the work. And in trying to offer everything, you are missing the one thing. The one thing. Not the efficient thing. Not the impressive thing. Not the thing that ensures everything is done correctly and no one has reason to find fault. Just one thing. The thing that Mary had found by simply sitting still and turning her attention toward the one who was actually in the room. Martha stood there with that truth settling into her slowly. The way warmth settles into your hands when you come inside from the cold. Not immediately. Not all at once. Gradually, layer by layer. There is something in this moment that belongs to you, if you want it. Because most of us live closer to Martha than we would like to admit. Not the version of Martha who is selfish or unkind. She was neither of those things. But the version of Martha who is genuinely good, genuinely loving, genuinely committed to caring for the people around her. And yet somehow, always in motion, always preparing for the next thing, always aware of what is not yet done, what still needs doing, what might go wrong if attention is not paid. Most of us know what it is to lie down at the end of a long day and feel, underneath the tiredness, a low, steady hum of things undone, conversations not yet had, responsibilities not yet met. We know the particular quality of busyness that feels virtuous while we are inside it, and somehow hollow when we finally stop. We know what it is to be so busy loving people that we forget to be still enough to receive love back. Martha was not wrong to prepare. She was not wrong to serve. She was not wrong to want things to be right. She had simply let the work become louder than the presence she was working for. And Jesus, who loved her completely, said her name twice, slowly, and reminded her that she was allowed to put some of it down. Tonight, in whatever room you are in right now, there is probably a version of that list. The things you did not finish today, the things waiting for tomorrow, the weight of everything you are responsible for that does not simply turn off when you close your eyes. You know the feeling, the way it sits behind your sternum, low and persistent, even when the rest of you is ready to rest. What if, just for now, you set it down the way Mary set everything down when she sat at his feet? Not permanently, not irresponsibly. Just for this hour, just for this particular stretch of quiet. The work will still be there in the morning. The responsibilities have not disappeared. But for right now, in the space between this breath and the next one, you are allowed to be less like Martha. Efficient, capable, indispensable, always moving, and more like Mary. Still, attentive, listening to something quieter than your own list of things to do. Let the room around you soften at the edges. Let the sounds outside become less distinct, more like the ambient sound of the world going about its business without requiring anything from you right now. Feel the weight of your body settling more deeply into wherever you are lying. You are not Martha tonight. managing everything from the edges of the room. Tonight, you are sitting at the feet of someone who said your name twice, slowly, and meant every syllable of it. Rest in that. There is a particular kind of tired that sleep does not fix. You have probably felt it. It is not the tiredness that comes from a long day of physical work. The kind that settles into your muscles and makes your bed feel like the most generous thing in the world. That tiredness is honest and clean, and it resolves itself with enough hours and enough stillness. The tiredness we are talking about now is something different, softer in some ways, more persistent in others. It lives not in the body, but somewhere slightly behind it, in the place where your sense of yourself lives, in the quiet interior room where you go when the day is finally over and you are alone with whatever is actually true about how you are doing. It is the tiredness of someone who has been giving for a long time without quite knowing how to receive. The tiredness of someone who has been useful, reliably and consistently useful, for so long that usefulness has become identity, and the thought of stopping, even for an afternoon, even for an hour, carries with it a faint but real anxiety, as though the stopping might reveal something about you that the doing has been covering over. Martha knew this tiredness, though she would not have been able to name it that way. She knew it in the way you know something that lives in your body rather than your thoughts. Not as an idea you have about yourself, but as a feeling you carry with you from room to room, from task to task, from season to season, like a stone in your pocket that you have stopped noticing because it has been there so long. Here is something worth saying gently, because it is true and it is easy to misunderstand. There was nothing wrong with Martha's love. This cannot be said clearly enough. The service, the preparation, the care for her guests, the effort that went into every meal, every clean surface, every cup of water brought to a tired traveler, all of it was real. All of it was generous. All of it came from a heart that genuinely wanted the people she loved to feel cared for. She was not performing. She was not trying to earn something or impress anyone. She was simply loving in the only language that had ever felt fully available to her. And that kind of love, practical, tangible, expressed through effort and attention and the labor of your hands, is a beautiful thing. The world needs it. Homes need it. Communities need it. The disciples on the road that afternoon needed exactly the bread and water that Martha's hands had prepared. So when we talk about what Jesus said to her, we have to be careful not to hear it as a dismissal of everything she was. He was not saying, "Your way of loving is wrong." He was not saying, "Sit down and do nothing, like your sister." He was not even saying, "You should be more like Mary." He was saying something much more specific and much more tender than any of those things. He was saying, "I can see how much you are carrying. And I can see that some of what you are carrying right now is not the work itself. It is the anxiety inside the work. The worry that has gotten into the doing and made it heavier than love was ever meant to be." think about what Martha actually said when she finally stopped moving long enough to speak. She did not say, "I am tired and I could use some help." She said, "Don't you care? Don't you care that my sister has left me to do all this work alone?" Those 3 words, "Don't you care," are doing a great deal of work in that sentence. They are not just a request for assistance. They are a window into an interior landscape that has been building pressure for longer than this particular afternoon. They are the words of someone who has been loving quietly and consistently, and without much acknowledgement for long enough that a small, frightened part of her has started to wonder, does any of this register? Does anyone notice? Is all of this effort visible to the people I am doing it for? Or am I somehow invisible inside my own service? This is the loneliness that lives at the center of Martha's busyness. Not the loneliness of being without people. Her house was full of people. Not the loneliness of being unloved. She was clearly and deeply loved by the people around her. But the particular loneliness of someone who is always on the giving side of every exchange, always the one making sure things are all right for everyone else, always the one holding the room together, and who has, somewhere along the way, quietly stopped expecting that anyone might ask how she is doing. The loneliness of being necessary without being known. This is not a loneliness that belongs only to the first century. If you have ever been the person in your family who holds everything together, the one who remembers the appointments, manages the difficult conversations, make sure everyone has what they need before they think to ask for it, you know something of what Martha felt in that room. If you have ever stayed late after everyone else left, finishing the thing that needed finishing because no one else was going to finish it, and driven home in the dark with a quiet ache you could not quite explain, you know something of what Martha felt. If you have ever helped someone through a difficult season of their life, given your time and energy and emotional presence, generously and consistently, and then found yourself lying awake at 3 a.m. wondering why you feel so empty, you know something of what Martha felt. The giving was real. The love behind the giving was real. But somewhere in the accumulation of all that loving outward, something necessary had been neglected. Something that lives at the center of a person and requires tending, the same way a fire requires tending. Not elaborate attention, not dramatic intervention, just regular, quiet acknowledgement. Just the simple act of stopping and saying, I am here too. Not just as a function, not just as a provider. I am here, and I have something I need as well. Martha had forgotten how to do that, or perhaps she had never quite learned. There is a question worth sitting with in the darkness tonight. Not to agitate you, but simply to let it breathe. What are you busy with right now? That is actually a way of not being still. This is not a guilty question. It is not an accusation. It is the kind of question that Jesus asked in the gentlest possible way when he said Martha's name twice. A question that came wrapped in complete acceptance of the person being asked. a question that had no judgment attached to it. Only curiosity, only love, only the sincere desire to see you actually rest. Because here is what busyness does. When we let it run unchecked, it gives us a reason not to sit with ourselves, not to sit with God, not to sit with the uncomfortable, unresolved, tender things that are waiting in the quiet for some attention. As long as there is something to prepare, something to organize, something to manage, something to improve, as long as there is a task that needs doing, we do not have to feel the thing we are not sure we want to feel. We do not have to ask the question we are not sure we want to answer. We do not have to be still long enough for something true to surface. Busyness, at its most subtle, is not just a way of being productive. It is a way of being safe. Mary understood something that Martha had not yet found her way to. And the interesting thing is, she understood it without arguing for it, without explaining it, without trying to convince anyone of anything. She simply practiced it. She sat down. She turned her attention toward the one person in the room who had something real to offer her. And she gave him that attention fully, without reservation, without the anxious part of her mind running a background calculation about what still needed doing. This was not passivity. This was not indifference to her sister's effort or her guest's comfort. It was a specific, intentional choice, the choice to recognize that this moment, this presence, this conversation happening in the middle of an ordinary evening in an ordinary house, in an ordinary village, was not going to come back, that you could not save it for later, that the only way to receive what was being offered was to be entirely present for it. And being entirely present for it meant, for now, letting the bread take care of itself. There is a kind of courage in that. Actually, a quiet kind. The courage of someone who has decided that being nourished is not a luxury she will defer until everything else is handled. The courage of someone who knows, in the deepest and most settled part of herself, that sitting at the feet of the one who loves her is not time stolen from more important things. It is the most important thing. It is the root from which everything else that matters is fed. Consider the olive trees in Bethany again for a moment. Those ancient, gnarled, patient trees whose trunks are thick with centuries of slow growing. They do not produce fruit by straining. They do not push their branches outward through force of will. They produce because they are rooted in something that nourishes them. Quietly, continuously, below the surface where no one can see it happening. The roots go down into the dark earth and find water and draw it upward through the whole length of the tree, all the way to the furthest tip of the furthest branch. And the fruit that appears in season is simply the overflow of all that quiet, invisible, underground nourishment. Mary was doing what the roots do. She was going down. She was finding the source. She was choosing, in what looked like stillness and looked like passivity from the outside, to do the single most productive thing available to her, to be nourished by the presence of the one who could actually nourish her, so that everything she gave afterward would come from a place that was full rather than a place that was running dry. Martha, in all her motion, in all her giving and preparing and providing, was the tree trying to produce fruit without maintaining its roots. Not a bad tree, not an unloving tree, just a tree that has gotten so busy growing upward and outward that it has spent less time than it needed going down. This is a pattern that does not belong only to Martha, and it does not belong only to the first century. It belongs to every person who has ever felt, underneath the surface of a busy and useful and well-intentioned life, that quiet hollowness, that sense that you are giving from a place that is not being replenished as fast as it is being drawn from, that you are offering warmth from a fire that has been burning for a long time without being fed. It belongs to every person who has told themselves they will rest when things calm down, will pray when they have more time, will be still when the season shifts, and there is finally a moment to breathe, and is found, year after year, that the moment never quite arrives, because the list never ends, because there is always one more thing, because the calm that you are waiting for before you begin is not something the world will hand you unprompted. The stillness, it turns out, is something you choose. It is something you sit down into, like Mary sat down. In the middle of everything that is still unfinished, in the middle of the noise and the need, and the guests who have not been fully attended to, you sit down anyway, and you turn your attention toward the one voice that has something real to say to you, and you let everything else, just for now, wait. Tonight, as your body grows heavier and your thoughts grow softer, notice whether there is something in you that is still moving. Not your body. Your body is still, or nearly still, but somewhere inside, some part of you that has not gotten the message yet that the day is over and you are allowed to release it. Some background process still running, still managing, still preparing for something that does not need to be prepared for right now. You do not need to force it to stop. You cannot force it to stop. Martha could not have forced it to stop, and neither can you. But you can do what Mary did. You can simply redirect your attention, not to the list, not to tomorrow, not to the thing you forgot, or the conversation you still need to have. Just here. Just the weight of your body. Just the sound of your own breathing. Slow and steady, and requiring nothing from you, except that you continue. Just the quiet sense, underneath everything else, of being in the presence of someone who already knows your name, who has already said it. Twice, slowly, and meant it. The work will be there in the morning. The responsibilities have not dissolved. But right now, in this moment, there is only one thing needed. And you are already doing it. Just by being still. Just by being here. Some time passed after that evening in Bethany. The way time passes in ordinary life. Not dramatically. Not with clear markers or obvious turning points, but in the accumulation of small days, each one largely like the one before it. The kind of passing that you only notice when you look back and realize how much ground has been covered without your quite tracking it. Seasons shifted. The roads between villages stayed dusty or turned muddy, depending on whether the rains had come. Life in the small house near the edge of Bethany continued in its rhythms. Bread made, water carried, evenings settling into their familiar quiet. And then Lazarus got sick. It began the way most serious things begin. Gradually, almost imperceptibly, the way a tide comes in. A tiredness that seemed ordinary at first, the kind that any person might feel after a long week. A paleness that Martha noticed before anyone said anything about it. Because Martha always noticed before anyone said anything. A slight withdrawal from the normal texture of the day. Less conversation at the evening meal. A preference for lying down in the afternoon that was new and slightly worrying. She watched him the way people watch someone they love when something is wrong, but they are not yet ready to name what it might be. Hoping each morning that the previous day had been an outlier. Bringing him water and bread with a care she tried to make look casual. Asking, with a lightness she did not entirely feel, whether he had slept well, whether he was warmer, whether he thought perhaps he should stay inside today. Lazarus, who knew his sister as well as anyone alive, answered her questions and accepted her care and did not tell her not to worry. Because he could see in her eyes that telling her not to worry would not accomplish anything useful. He was right about that. Mary sat with him in the afternoons, not doing anything, particularly. Not managing his condition or monitoring his symptoms with Martha's careful efficiency. Just sitting with him the way she sat with things she loved. Fully present, unhurried, attentive in the quiet way that was simply her nature. She brought him small things sometimes. A cup of water, a cloth dampened with cool water for his forehead when the fever began. But mostly, she just sat near him and let the sitting itself be the offering. There is something that very ill people will often tell you. If you ask them what helped, not the things that were done for them, necessarily, though those things mattered, but the presence, the specific quality of someone being genuinely, undistractedly there, not checking something at the edge of the room, not managing their own discomfort with the situation by staying busy, but actually there, in the room, in the moment, making the simple and profound statement that being in this room with you right now is where I want to be. Mary was that kind of presence. And Lazarus, who was getting worse rather than better, received it the way a person receives warmth on a cold night. Gratefully, quietly, without needing to say much about it. It was Martha who made the decision to send word to Jesus. Of course it was. Not because Mary did not want to. She did, with everything in her. But Martha was the one who moved when something needed moving, who acted when something required action. And the situation had moved past the point where sitting quietly was going to be sufficient. Something needed to be done. And the most important thing she could think to do was to reach the one person she trusted completely. She composed the message in her head before she said it aloud. And when she said it, it was short, direct. 5 words in the telling, though the love behind them was much larger than 5 words could hold. Lord, the one you love is sick. That was all. No instructions. No specific request. No outline of what she thought he should do, or how quickly he needed to do it. Just the fact, offered to the one person she believed could do something about it, with the implicit trust underneath the fact that he would know what to do better than she did. This, in its own way, was Martha's version of sitting at his feet. She did not know it yet, but it was. The messenger went. The message was sent. And then began the part of the story that is, in some ways, the most difficult part to sit with. The waiting. Not the ordinary waiting of a person who has made a request and expects a response within a reasonable time frame. Not the waiting of someone who sent a letter and knows it will take a few days to arrive and a few days for an answer to come back. But the particular, agonizing kind of waiting that happens when you have reached out to the one person who you believe can change things. And the silence that comes back is not the silence of someone who did not receive your message. It is the silence of someone who did receive it, and who is, for reasons you cannot see or understand, not coming yet. Days passed. The messenger returned without Jesus. He had delivered the message. Jesus had heard it, and he had not come. This is the part of the story that is almost unbearable to read if you are in the middle of your own version of it. If you are in the middle of a season where you have prayed clearly and sincerely and with your whole heart, and what you have heard back is not yes and not no, but something that feels, from the inside, terrifyingly like nothing. Like the message did not land. Like the prayer went up and dissolved into silence somewhere between you and the place you were trying to reach. Martha kept moving, because that was how she handled things she could not control. She found things she could control, and she handled those instead. She managed Lazarus's care with meticulous attention. She kept the house running. She made sure there was food, and that neighbors who came to check on him were received graciously, and that everything within her reach was being done as well as it could be done. But underneath all of that movement, there was something shifting. The confidence she had felt when she sent that message. The clear trust of someone who knows who to call and believes the call will be answered, was developing hairline fractures. Not breaking, not collapsed, but cracked. In the way that things crack when they are under sustained pressure that they were not designed to hold indefinitely. She did not say this to anyone. She kept it behind the movement, behind the efficiency, behind the capable exterior that everyone in the village associated with her. But in the quiet moments, and there were very few of them, because she was careful about that, she felt the questions beginning to form. Why hasn't he come? He got the message. He knows. So why doesn't he? She did not let herself finish that sentence, because she had asked that question once before, in a different context, and she had not loved the answer it implied. But the question formed anyway, in the private room behind her eyes, in the middle of the night, when the management of the day could not reach it. Doesn't he care? Mary was quieter than usual. If that was possible for Mary, who was already the quieter of the two sisters, she had found some interior depth of stillness that was different from her ordinary stillness. Less like the peaceful stillness of someone who has chosen to rest. More like the stillness of someone who is holding something very carefully. The way you hold something fragile with both hands and do not move quickly, because moving quickly might break it. What she was holding was faith. Not the comfortable, untested faith of easy seasons. Not the faith that has never had to explain itself or defend itself, or simply persist in the dark without anything to show for it. But the harder and more valuable kind. The faith that has looked directly at the silence and has not found an answer and has chosen, without an answer, to keep holding on. She thought about that evening when she had sat at his feet. The quality of presence she had felt in that room. The specific, unmistakable sense that the person she was in the presence of was not a person who did anything carelessly, who said anything he did not mean, who loved anyone partially or with conditions attached. She held that memory, the way you hold a candle in a wind, cupped in your hands, shielded with your own body, keeping the flame alive, not through certainty, but through the simple, stubborn act of not letting go. She did not know why he had not come. She did not pretend to know. But she had sat at his feet, and she had heard his voice, and she had felt the quality of being seen by him, fully, without judgment, without the performance of having it together. And that memory was not nothing. That memory was not a small thing. It was, in fact, the thing she was living on right now, in the absence of anything more recent to sustain her. And then Lazarus died. Not suddenly. Not in a way that came as a complete shock, because the sickness had been progressing, and Martha had been watching it progress, and some part of her had known. With the particular knowledge that comes from loving someone and paying close attention to them over a long time, that this was moving somewhere she did not want it to go. But knowing something is coming and having it arrive are two different things. The knowing lives in your mind. The arriving lives in your whole body, in your chest, in the particular quality of the silence in a room when someone who was in it is no longer in it. The house became a different house in the hours after he died. Neighbors came, as they did in that time and place, immediately, practically, with food and with presents, and with the particular kind of communal mourning that ancient cultures understood better than modern ones do. The house filled with people. There was weeping, the open and unashamed kind that grief invites when you do not try to manage it or contain it within acceptable limits. Martha received everyone. She thanked them for coming. She arranged things because there were things to be arranged. And she arranged them with the same thoroughness she brought to everything. And if the thoroughness felt slightly mechanical in those hours, slightly automatic, the way a person moves through the motions when the interior has gone temporarily offline, no one said so. Because grief does what it does, and people know better than to comment on the shape it takes in someone else. Mary sat on the floor and wept. 4 days. This is the detail the story gives us. And it is a detail worth pausing over because it is not an accidental number. In the understanding of that time and place, 4 days meant something specific. It meant gone. Fully, completely, irreversibly gone. There was a belief, common in those days, that the spirit of a person might linger near the body for 3 days after death. That there was, perhaps, still some thread of connection, some possibility, however remote, in those first 72 hours. 4 days meant that thread had been cut. 4 days meant the tomb was sealed and the mourning had fully begun. And the category of this situation was no longer crisis, but loss. No longer emergency, but grief. 4 days meant that whatever you had been hoping for in the days before needed to be let go of. 4 days meant that the time for hoping had passed. And it was into exactly this. 4 days of sealed silence. 4 days of definitive finality. 4 days of grief that had already begun to accept its own permanence. That Jesus finally came down the road toward Bethany. Why did he wait? This is the question that hangs over those 4 days, like weather. We do not have a complete answer to it. The story gives us a glimpse. Jesus says, at one point, that the delay was not indifference, not ignorance, not powerlessness, but something that was moving toward a purpose larger than the one his friends could see from inside their grief. Something that would, in the end, produce a faith deeper and more unshakable than the faith that gets built in easy seasons. When what you asked for arrives promptly, and you feel the simple warmth of answered prayer. But that explanation, true as it is, does not make the 4 days easier. It does not make the waiting lighter, or the silence less silent. It does not retroactively fill those days with peace, or drain them of their fear and sorrow. It just means that the silence was not empty. The silence was not the absence of attention. It was not the absence of love. It was not God looking away at exactly the moment when the people he loved needed him most. It was something else, something that required, from Martha and Mary, the most difficult thing that faith ever requires: to continue trusting, not because the evidence currently visible supports the trust, but because what you know about the character of the one you trust has not changed, even when his actions do not match your timeline. To hold the candle in the wind, to stay in the room even when the room has gone quiet. If you are in a season of silence right now, if you have sent your message and you are waiting, and the waiting has gone on longer than you thought it would, longer than you think you can sustain, this part of the story is for you specifically. Not to tell you that the silence means everything is fine and you should not feel what you feel. Martha felt what she felt, and Mary felt what she felt. And the story does not correct them for their grief or their confusion or their question of why. But to say this gently in the dark, the silence is not the end of the story. It never has been. He is on the road. He has been on the road, and he knows the way to where you are. Let that truth settle into you slowly, the way the warmth of a fire settles into the room long after you have stopped actively tending it. You do not need to hold it tightly. You do not need to argue yourself into believing it or force it to feel true when it does not feel true right now. Just let it rest near you, like a lamp left burning in the window. A signal, a small, steady light, saying, someone knows the way here. Someone is coming. Outside the window of whatever room you are in, the night is doing what nights have always done, moving slowly, steadily, without hurrying, toward the place where it becomes morning. The darkness is not permanent. It is simply patient, and you can be patient too. Let your body grow heavier. Let your breathing slow. Let the story continue to unfold in the space behind your closed eyes. The road from the Jordan Valley winding up through the hills toward Bethany. The dusty path growing narrower as it approaches the village. The sound of sandals on dry stones. Steady and unhurried. He is not rushing. He never rushes. But he is coming toward you. And he has been coming all along. She heard that he was coming before anyone told her. Not in any supernatural sense. Simply in the way that Martha heard most things. Through the network of awareness she maintained about the world around her. The constant low-level attentiveness to what was happening at the edges of her immediate situation. Someone in the courtyard mentioned it. Or perhaps she caught a fragment of conversation from the neighbors who were still filling the house. Or perhaps she simply felt the shift in the atmosphere the way you feel a change in pressure before rain arrives. However it reached her, the information landed with the particular force of something that has been waited for so long, it has almost stopped being expected. Jesus was on the road outside the village. He had not yet come in. Martha stood for a moment, in the middle of whatever she had been doing. And then she made a decision that was entirely consistent with who she had always been. She went to meet him. Not waiting for him to come to her. Not sending someone else ahead. She wrapped her outer garment around her shoulders, and she walked out of the house, past the neighbors and the mourners, and the low sound of weeping that had filled every corner of her home for 4 days. And she went out to the road where he was. Mary stayed behind. She was still sitting with the grief. Inside the house, in the middle of the community of mourners, the way someone stays in the center of something when they do not yet have the words for the edges of it. Martha walked toward Jesus the way she did most things, directly, without meandering, without hesitation in her feet, even if there was hesitation in her heart. And when she reached him, the first thing she said was not a greeting. It was a truth she had been holding for 4 days. And it came out of her the way things come out of people when they have been held too long. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. 5 days ago, before the messenger returned without him, before the 3rd morning, before the 4th morning, before they had wrapped Lazarus in burial cloths and laid him in the cave and rolled the stone across the entrance. 5 days ago, this sentence would have sounded like an accusation. And perhaps there was still an echo of that in it. Perhaps Martha could not have told you, in that moment, exactly how much of what she was feeling was grief, and how much was something sharper, the faint but real edge of a person who trusted completely and then watched the thing she was trusting against happen anyway. But here is the thing about Martha. Underneath the edge, underneath the hurt, underneath the 4 days of waiting and the loss that had arrived in spite of the waiting, there was something that had not moved. Something that the silence and the death and the grief had shaken but not dislodged. She said it in the very next breath. But even now, I know that whatever you ask of God, God will give you. Even now, 2 of the most quietly extraordinary words in the whole story. Not before, not then, when it might have made a difference. But even now, when the window that seemed obvious has closed, now when the tomb is sealed and 4 days have passed, and the category of this situation has shifted from emergency to finality, even now, she knows something. Even now, she has not stopped believing in the essential character of the person standing in front of her. This is not certainty about the outcome. She does not know what he is going to do. She does not know if there is anything left to do, by any ordinary measure of what is possible. But she knows him. And knowing him is, it turns out, a different thing from knowing what he will do. It is deeper than that. It is the knowledge that has survived 4 days of silence and 1 stone rolled across an entrance and still managed to find its way into the sentence. Even now. He looked at her with the same quality of attention he always carried. The quality that made you feel fully seen without feeling exposed. And he said, "Your brother will rise again." Martha heard this the way a person hears something they already know, but are not sure applies to their immediate situation. She knew the theology. She was a woman of faith, deeply and genuinely, and the resurrection of the dead at the last day was not a foreign concept to her. It was part of the framework she had always lived inside. So she answered with the framework, I know that he will rise again in the resurrection on the last day. It was a true statement. It was a faithful statement. It was also, gently, a statement that placed the comfort at a distance. At the last day, at the far end of time, in the category of the eventually and the eschatological, rather than here. Now, in this afternoon, on this road outside this village where she was standing in her grief, talking to the person she had sent for 4 days ago. And then Jesus said something that stopped her. Not loudly, not dramatically. With the same quietness he brought to most things that mattered most. He said, I am the resurrection and the life. Not, I will bring about the resurrection. Not, the resurrection is coming and I am connected to it. But I am. Present tense. Not a future event he was pointing her toward, but a present reality she was standing in front of. Not a doctrine, but a person. Not a comfort located at the last day, but a life that was available right now. In this moment, on this dusty road, to the woman standing in front of him with 4 days of grief in her eyes and 2 extraordinary words still warm on her lips. He said, Do you believe this? This is the question. Not the question he asked only of Martha. On a road outside Bethany, in the middle of the 1st century. The question that has echoed out from that moment across every century since. Finding its way to every person who has ever stood in front of their own sealed tomb, their own irreversible loss, their own situation that has passed the point of what seems possible, and had to decide what they actually believe about the person they are talking to. Not, do you believe in the doctrine of resurrection? Not, do you believe that God is powerful in general, in the abstract, in the category of theological propositions you assent to as a matter of faith? But do you believe this? Do you believe it about this situation? This loss? This sealed stone? This particular 4-day-old grief that you are currently standing in the middle of? Martha answered. And her answer is one of the most beautiful things in the entire Gospel of John. Not because it is theologically polished. It is not. Quite. But because of what it is and is not. She does not say, yes. I understand exactly what you mean and I believe it completely, and I am certain about what is about to happen. She says, yes. Lord, I believe that you are the Christ, the Son of God, who is coming into the world. She does not answer his question about resurrection directly. She answers it with who she believes he is. She places her confidence not in her understanding of what he is about to do, but in her knowledge of who he is. And that, it turns out, is exactly the right place to put it. That is the ground that holds. Not the plan she can see. Not the outcome she can predict. Not the theology she can fully articulate. But the person, who he is, which has not changed, which the silence did not change, and the 4 days did not change, and the stone did not change. Yes, Lord, I believe you are who you are. And that is enough. She went back to the house. She found Mary in the middle of the mourners, still sitting, still submerged in the communal grief. And she bent down and said something quietly into her sister's ear. The story tells us what she said. The teacher is here, and he is asking for you. 5 words. And Mary was on her feet. This is worth noticing. Not because it says something small about Martha, but it says something large. This woman, who had walked out to meet Jesus because she needed to, who had said the thing she needed to say and heard the thing she needed to hear and asked the question she needed to ask. She came back, and her first act was to find her sister, to bring her to the same place, to make sure Mary had access to what she had just found on that road. Even in her grief, even still processing what had just happened to her own interior landscape, she came back for Mary. This is what love does when it has found something real. It does not hoard it. It turns around. Mary rose quickly. The mourners in the house, seeing her get up suddenly and move toward the door, assumed she was going to the tomb to weep there. They followed her. This is what mourners did. They stayed close. They accompanied. They did not let the grieving go alone to the places where grief was deepest. So when Mary went, a crowd went with her. She found Jesus still on the road outside the village, where Martha had left him. And when she saw him, when she actually saw him, the person she had sat at the feet of, the person she had listened to with her whole self, the person whose voice she had held in her memory like a candle through 4 days of darkness, she fell at his feet. It is Mary's posture again. In every story she appears, she is at his feet. Not because she is diminished there, not because she is less than anyone else in the room, but because she has discovered something about feet, specifically his feet, that she keeps returning to. There is something at ground level, in the posture of someone who has released the need to stand at the same height as their pride, that opens a person to receiving what they need. Mary knew this without being taught it. It was simply where she always ended up. And she said the same thing her sister had said, in almost exactly the same words. Lord, if you had been here, my brother would not have died. The same sentence. But the context was different, and the person was different. And so the sentence landed differently. Martha had said it at the beginning of a conversation. Mary said it and then stopped. She did not add the even now. She did not offer the theological confidence. She simply said it. And then the sentence collapsed into weeping. And the people around her were weeping. And Jesus. This is one of the most remarkable moments in any of the Gospels. And it deserves to be said plainly. Jesus wept. He wept. The one who had said, I am the resurrection and the life. who knew what he was about to do, who could see the end of this story from the inside in a way that no one else present could see it. He stood at the edge of the grief of people he loved, and he was moved by it, and he wept. Not performed weeping, not the kind of emotional response that is put on for the benefit of an audience. The Greek word used here is the shortest verse in the Bible and one of the most precise. He wept. Quietly. Actually, he felt the weight of what was being felt in that crowd, and in those two sisters, and in that village. And it entered him, and it came out as tears. The people who were watching said something that has always stayed with me. See how he loved him. They did not say, see how powerful he is, or see how certain he is, or see how calm he is in the face of this. They said, see how he loved him. They read his tears as love, as proof of love, as the visible evidence of something interior that was, in that moment, too full to stay inside, and some others who were also watching asked a question that was fair. Could not he who opened the eyes of the blind man have kept this man from dying? It is a fair question. It is the question that 4 days of waiting produces naturally. The question that lives in the gap between what you know someone is capable of and what they have appeared so far to do about your particular situation. Could he not have come sooner? Could he not have prevented this? Jesus did not answer that question in words. He answered it in the only way it could actually be answered, by moving toward the tomb. The tomb was a cave, with a stone rolled across the entrance. There was nothing unusual about this. It was the common burial practice of the time and place. Tombs like this were carved into the hillside, sealed with a large flat stone that sat in a groove and could be rolled aside if necessary. Tombs were not meant to be opened once sealed. That was the whole point of the stone. Jesus stood in front of it, and the crowd gathered around him. And there was a quality to that moment that the story conveys without quite describing. The quality of standing at the edge of something, at the precise boundary between what everyone in the crowd was certain was possible and what none of them could yet imagine. Take away the stone, he said. Martha, practical, present, always the one who manages logistics, responded immediately and honestly, Lord, by this time there is a bad smell, for he has been there 4 days. She was not being faithless. She was being accurate. 4 days was 4 days, and she knew what 4 days meant. And whatever she believed about who Jesus was, she was also standing in front of the material facts of the situation. And the material facts were significant. He looked at her with the same gentleness he had brought to every other moment in their relationship and said, Did I not tell you that if you believe, you will see the glory of God? She let them take away the stone. That is not a small thing. To stand in front of the sealed evidence of everything you have already grieved and lost and processed enough to begin accepting, and to say yes to the stone being moved. That required something from Martha. It required the faith that had survived 4 days of silence to take one more step. past the border of what made sense, past the edge of what any of her experience had prepared her for. She said yes. The stone moved. And then Jesus looked upward, in the way of someone beginning a conversation that matters. And he prayed. Not a long prayer, not a complex one, but an honest one. A prayer that acknowledged out loud that he was not doing this alone, that this moment was not a performance of his own power, but a participation in something larger. A love that moved through him toward the people he loved. And then he called into the tomb with a loud voice, not because loudness was required for the miracle, but because of what it meant to call loudly into a sealed, dark place. The unmistakable clarity of it, the refusal to be tentative, the full-voiced declaration that the darkness was not the end, and the silence was not final, and the stone being rolled back was not a mistake. Lazarus, come out. And out of the dark, wrapped in burial cloths, blinking perhaps at the light that was suddenly everywhere, Lazarus came. And Jesus said to the people standing there with their mouths open and their grief suddenly, entirely, incoherently rearranged, unbind him. Let him go. Let the image rest with you for a moment. Not the miracle itself, though the miracle matters. And it is real, and it happened. But the particular image of unbinding. The people gathered around Lazarus, carefully unwrapping what had been wrapped for burial. The linen coming away from someone who no longer needed it. The face covering removed. The person who had been sealed inside the definition of dead, now standing in the afternoon, light, blinking, and alive, and himself. This is what Jesus does. Not only with Lazarus. With the things in us that have been sealed for so long, we have stopped expecting them to move. The hopes we wrapped in burial linen and placed in the dark because they seemed finished. The parts of ourselves we sealed behind stones because it was too painful to keep them accessible, too vulnerable to leave them unprotected. The prayers we eventually stopped praying because the 4 days became 5, became 10, became years. And the silence had gone on long enough that we began to accommodate ourselves to it. He still calls into those places. Loudly, clearly, without tentativeness. And what he says is not, come back to where you were before. What he says is, come out. Come into the light. Come to where I am. Come to where the stone is no longer in the way. Come out. Tonight, in the quiet of wherever you are, there may be something that feels sealed. Something that has been in the dark long enough that you have begun to make peace with the dark. You do not have to force anything open tonight. You do not have to manufacture a feeling or summon a faith you do not currently have. You are not Martha, being asked to roll back a stone in the next 5 minutes. You are simply a person lying still in the quiet, listening to a story about someone who walks towards sealed places and speaks into them. Let the voice find whatever it finds. Let the stone be whatever it is. And when you are ready, not tonight necessarily, But whenever the readiness comes, trust that the unbinding is possible, that it has happened before, that the one who called Lazarus by name knows yours just as well, and calls it just as clearly. Into whatever darkness you are currently in. The night is deep now, wherever you are. The kind of deep that means the day is fully over and the world is settled, and there is nothing left to do but breathe and let go. Let your body be heavy. Let your mind release its grip on everything it has been holding. Somewhere in the story, in a village on the slope of a hill outside Jerusalem, two sisters are standing in the afternoon light watching their brother walk toward them out of the dark. And the word that is filling the air is not grief anymore. It is something that does not have a clean name in any language. But you know the feeling it describes. You have felt it, at least once, at the edge of something you thought was finished. The feeling of something returning that you had stopped waiting for. Rest in that. The afternoon light was different after. Not physically different. The sun was still in the same position it had been a few moments before. The hills were the same color. The dust on the road had not changed. But the quality of the light felt altered in the way that everything feels altered when your interior landscape has shifted so completely that the exterior world seems to be reflecting it back to you. Colors a little more saturated. Edges a little more defined. The particular brightness of an ordinary afternoon that you would never have noticed if you had not just spent 4 days in the specific dimness of grief. Lazarus stood in the entrance of the tomb, still wrapped in his burial cloths, blinking at the world he had apparently not finished with. And the people around him stood in the particular silence that descends when something has happened that none of their existing categories can fully accommodate. Not the silence of emptiness. The silence of too much. Arriving too quickly. Requiring more processing than the immediate moment can provide. Martha was the first to move. Of course she was. She moved toward her brother the way she moved toward everything that needed tending. Directly. Purposefully. With her hands already knowing what to do before her mind had finished deciding. She began to unwrap the linen from his face. Her fingers careful and practiced. The same fingers that had wrapped him 4 days ago in the particular intimacy of grief that involves touching someone you love for what you believe is the last time. Now those same fingers were unwrapping him. This is the detail the story passes over quickly, but that deserves to be lingered in. The specific experience of Martha's hands doing this work. 4 days ago, wrapping. Today, unwrapping. The same hands, the same linen, the same face beneath it. But everything else entirely different. She did not speak for a moment. She just worked. And if there were tears moving down her face while she worked, they were a different kind than the ones she had been crying for 4 days. Not the tears of loss, but the tears of something returning, which are their own specific thing, and do not have a clean name, but which anyone who has experienced them knows immediately and viscerally as one of the most disorienting and complete forms of relief the human body is capable of producing. She unwound the cloth from his face, and Lazarus looked at her, and she looked at him. And whatever passed between them in that moment belongs to them. It is not in the story. It was not recorded. It was simply lived in the way that the most important moments in any life are simply lived rather than narrated. Mary had not moved from where she was standing. She was watching, not frozen, not stunned in the disconnected way of someone whose nervous system has gone offline, but stilled in the specific way that Mary was stilled by things that moved her most deeply. Her eyes were full. The tears were moving, but slowly. The way tears move when they are not grief tears or relief tears exactly, but something that doesn't have a name because it exists at the intersection of too many feelings happening simultaneously for any single word to cover. She was watching her brother walk out of a tomb. She was watching something she had not allowed herself to fully imagine, even in the private space of her own hope, because the hope had been fragile enough that she had cupped her hands around it rather than opening them, protecting the small flame rather than fanning it into something larger. And now, the thing she had held so carefully, the thing she had maintained with such quiet and costly faithfulness through 4 days of silence and sealed stone, that thing was standing in front of her in the afternoon light. Blinking, she walked toward him slowly. Not the way Martha walked, purposeful and immediate. More the way you approach something you are still half afraid might not be real. Slowly, gently, as though too sudden a movement might disturb whatever delicate arrangement of grace had produced this moment. She reached him. She put her hands on his face. The same face she had sat beside through the long days of his illness. The same face she had looked at in the flickering lamplight of the evenings before he died. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she simply held on to him. There is something about the way this story ends, or rather, the way this particular chapter of it ends, that I want to stay with for a moment. Because it is easy to rush past it toward the larger theological meaning and miss what is simply and humanly true about it. 2 sisters got their brother back. That is the whole of it. At the most essential level, before it is a miracle, before it is a sign, before it is a demonstration of divine power or a foreshadowing of resurrection, or a theological statement about who Jesus is, it is 2 sisters getting their brother back. It is Martha's hands unwrapping a face she thought she would never see alive again. It is Mary holding on to someone she had already grieved and released and learned to live without. It is profoundly, completely personal. And Jesus wept in the middle of it. Not because he did not know the outcome, not because he was surprised by the grief, but because he loved the people who were grieving, and their grief entered him, and the entering of it mattered to him, and the mattering was real. This is who he is, not a force, not a principle, not a system of theological propositions that produces comfort when applied correctly. A person who stands at the edge of the places where the people he loves are hurting and is moved by what he finds there, and weeps, and then acts. There was a conversation later that the story does not record, but that I imagine happened in the quiet of the evening, after the crowd had thinned and the mourners had gone home, and the house in Bethany had settled back into something resembling its ordinary self. Though ordinary was not quite the right word anymore, because the house that had spent 4 days as a house of mourning was now a house where the person who had been mourned was sitting at the table, eating bread, alive. I imagine Martha made the bread. Of course she did. Because Martha always made the bread, and because the making of it that evening would have been the most extraordinary, ordinary thing she had ever done. The specific, grounding, hand-on-clay bowl reality of feeding people she loved, including one she had not expected to feed again. And I imagine Mary sat near Lazarus, just near him, not doing anything in particular, just sitting in the fact of his presence, which was no longer something she took for granted, which was now something she understood at the level of her whole self to be a gift, received from hands that did not owe it to her, given in a timing she had not chosen and could not have predicted, arriving after a silence long enough that the arrival still felt slightly unreal, like something you keep expecting to take back. I imagine Jesus was there too, sitting in the room the way he sat in rooms, fully present, unhurried, not performing anything, not requiring anything, simply there. And I imagine that in the particular quality of that evening, the bread smell, the lamplight, the sound of Lazarus's voice saying ordinary things, there was a fullness in that house that is difficult to describe, except by saying that it felt, to the people sitting in it, exactly like what it was, undeserved, unexpected, entirely real, entirely grace. Here is what this story says to me, and perhaps to you. If you are in a season where the stone feels very much in place, God's timing is not indifference. This is one of the most important things the 4 days teach. And it is also one of the most difficult things to hold on to when you are inside them. Because from inside the 4 days, the silence feels like absence. The delay feels like inattention. The unanswered prayer feels, if you are honest, like a prayer that did not reach where it was going, or like a God who received the message and decided it was not urgent enough to respond to immediately. Martha felt this. Mary felt this. The story does not pretend they did not, but the story also shows us the end of the silence. And what the end of it reveals is not that God was absent during the 4 days. It is that the 4 days were inside something larger than the 4 days. That the silence was not empty. It was full of something that required the 4 days to become what it became. That the love that arrived after the waiting was not smaller for having made them wait. It was if anything. Larger in what it produced. Larger in what it revealed about who Jesus was. Larger in what it did to the faith of the people who had carried their hope through the silence and come out the other side of it, with the hope still in their hands. The waiting was not wasted. It never is, even when you cannot see what it is producing from inside it. And here is the other thing this story says. The thing that belongs to both sisters equally and in different ways. You do not have to have it together to be loved by him. Martha came to him with her grief and her edge and her two extraordinary words. Even now. And a faith that was cracked but not broken. A trust that had hairline fractures running through it but had not collapsed. And he met her exactly there. He did not ask her to clean up her faith before bringing it to him. He did not require her to arrive without the hurt or the question or the barely contained emotion of someone who has been holding things together for 4 days, past what she thought she could manage. He said her name twice. He asked her one question. He met her where she was. And Mary came to him without words at all. Just her grief and her posture and the tears and her hands eventually reaching for her brother's face. And he wept. He stood at the edge of her loss and he entered it with her. And then he moved it. 2 different women, 2 different ways of arriving at the same person. 2 different expressions of the same love and the same trust. One articulate and one wordless. One standing and one at his feet. And he received them both. Completely. Without ranking one above the other. Without preferring the theologically coherent response over the one that was simply weeping. Without asking either of them to be more like the other. He took what they brought him. All of it. And he worked with that. Tonight, whatever you are bringing, whether it is a Martha kind of faith, cracked and effortful, and still moving, even though the moving costs something, or a Mary kind of faith, quiet and unspoken, and expressed mostly in the posture of just wanting to be near him. He takes it. He takes all of it. The even now and the wordless weeping and everything in between. You do not have to arrive in better shape than you are in. You do not have to have resolved the 4 days before you come to the edge of the tomb. You just have to come. The stone is his problem. The timing is his problem. Your only part in this is the part that Martha and Mary both managed. In their own ways, through 4 days of silence that seem to have no answer, keep coming. Keep knowing who he is, even when you cannot see what he is doing. Keep your hands open. The night around you is very quiet now. The kind of quiet that has settled in all the way, past the surface sounds, into the deeper layers where the world is simply resting, simply being, simply continuing its slow revolution without requiring anything from you. Your breath is slower than it was an hour ago. The weight of the day has moved from your muscles down into the mattress beneath you, into the earth below that, dispersing slowly outward in all directions, the way warmth disperses when the source of it is no longer being actively tended. Somewhere in Bethany, in a house with lamplight in the windows and bread on the table, and 3 people sitting in the specific happiness of the unrepeatable and undeserved, the evening is going on. It is enough. More than enough. Let that sufficiency settle over you like something warm, like a cloth unwound from a face, like the particular quality of light that comes after 4 days of darkness, like your name, said twice, by someone who means every letter of it. Rest now. There is one more evening in Bethany that the story gives us. It comes later. Sometime after the tomb. After the stone. After Lazarus walked out, blinking into the afternoon light, and Martha's hands unwrapped his face, and Mary held onto him in the particular way of someone who has been given back something they had already finished grieving. Life had continued in the way that life insists on continuing, even after the extraordinary. The bread still needed making. The water still needed carrying. The village still went about its business in the rhythms that villages have maintained since people first gathered in them and decided to stay. But something in the house had changed. Not dramatically. Not in a way that would have been visible to a stranger passing through. The same low doorway. The same worn threshold stone. The same clay pots near the entrance in their particular arrangement that said, "Someone who cares about order lives here. And someone who cares about warmth lives here too." From the outside, it looked the same as it always had. But inside, there was a quality of presence that had not been there before. Or perhaps, more accurately, a quality of awareness. An awareness of what the house contained, of who was in it, and what that meant, and how easily it could have been otherwise. Jesus came back to Bethany 6 days before the Passover. The story tells us that they made him a dinner. And the details it gives us about that dinner are few but specific. And those specific details are, in the way of the best details in any story, the ones that carry the most weight, Martha served. Of course she did. And this time, this is the thing. There is no complaint in it. No edge underneath the serving. No simmer of resentment about who is doing the work and who is sitting still. She serves the way a person serves when the serving has been returned to what it actually is, an act of love. A gift offered freely, without the anxiety having gotten inside it, without the keeping of an invisible ledger that tracks who is contributing what, and whether anyone is noticing. She serves because she loves, and the love is enough. It does not require acknowledgement or reciprocation or the reassurance that it is being seen. It is simply what she has to offer, and she offers it. And the offering is clean and uncomplicated in a way it has not always been. This is what healing looks like in a person like Martha. Not that she stops serving. She could not stop serving any more than she could stop breathing. But that the serving is restored to its original nature. That the love and the work become, once again, the same thing. That the moving and the stillness are no longer in competition with each other, but exist in the same house, in the same evening, without either one making the other wrong. And Mary took a pound of very costly perfume, pure nard, the kind that came from a plant grown in the high mountains of northern India, that traveled enormous distances along ancient trade routes to arrive in a small alabaster jar in a house in a village on the slope of a hill outside Jerusalem. It was worth a year's wages for an ordinary laborer. The kind of thing a family might own as a long-term asset, something to be sold in an emergency, a financial safety net in a material form. She broke it open, and she poured it on his feet. And then she wiped his feet with her hair. The fragrance filled the whole house. The story is specific about this, and the specificity matters. Not one corner of the room, not just the area around where he was sitting. The whole house, every room, through the doorway and into the courtyard, perhaps, and from there into the street. This particular smell that would have been immediately recognizable as something precious, something rare, something not used casually or carelessly. This is Mary's fullest expression, the most complete version of the posture she had always carried. At his feet, giving everything, holding nothing back, not calculating the cost, because the cost was not, in this moment, the relevant category. She had sat at his feet and listened with everything she had. She had fallen at his feet in grief, wordless, letting the tears speak what language could not. And now she was at his feet again, with the most valuable thing she owned, pouring it out without hesitation, wiping it with her hair in an act so intimate and so unmistakably personal that everyone in the room would have felt the weight of it. This was not a gesture. This was not a performance designed to be observed and admired. This was a woman using her own hair to dry the feet of someone she loved. And if there is a more complete way to say I have nothing left to protect, no dignity left to manage, no version of myself I am trying to preserve, I am simply here, completely for you. It does not immediately come to mind. Someone in the room said it was a waste. Judas said it. The story names him and notes quietly that his concern for the poor was not the real concern, but the objection itself, even from a dishonest source, contains a question that is worth acknowledging. Because it is a question that lives in a lot of us. Is this too much? Is this not a little excessive? Could not this same love be expressed more reasonably, more efficiently, with better return on the investment? Jesus said, "Leave her alone." 2 words. Direct. Complete. Allowing no room for negotiation. Leave her alone. She has done a beautiful thing. There is something I want to say about that word. Beautiful. Not useful. not efficient, not spiritually appropriate or theologically correct, or an admirable demonstration of devotion. Beautiful. The word that belongs to things that have no justification beyond themselves, that exist not because they accomplish a task, but because they are simply, in their own nature, worth existing. The word you use for the quality of light on water at a certain hour, for the specific feeling of a piece of music that reaches somewhere inside you that nothing else can reach. For the way an old woman's hands look when she is doing something she has always known how to do. Beautiful. Jesus called what Mary did beautiful, which means that the pouring out, the lavish, uncalculated, economically irrational pouring out of the most valuable thing she owned, was not, in his view, excessive. It was not too much. It was, in fact, exactly right. It was the precise and appropriate response to who he was and what he meant to her and what he had done. For her, for her sister, for her brother, for the 4 days she had carried her faith through the dark like a candle in cupped hands. She was not wasting the perfume. She was letting the outside match the inside. She was making visible, in the only way available to her, something that lived at a depth where words could not reach it, and the fragrance of it filled the whole house. Both sisters are in this story, and both sisters matter. And the story does not end by declaring one of them right and the other one corrected. Martha is serving beautifully from a place that has been healed of its anxiety, restored to its original nature, loving in the language that was always hers without the weight that had gotten inside it. Mary is at his feet. Again. Still. Always. The posture that has never changed. The orientation that is simply who she is. Turned toward him. Attentive. Giving what she has without calculation. 2 sisters. 2 expressions of love. Both received. Both real. Both, in their own way, beautiful. This is the ending the story offers. And it is a generous one. Not be like Mary and not like Martha. Not contemplation is holiness and activity is lesser. Not the quiet people are doing it right and the busy people need to stop. But whatever language love speaks in you, speak it. Whatever the expression of your devotion looks like, hands busy with bread, or hands reaching for something costly to pour out, or simply hands folded in a lap and a face turned toward the one who has something to say. Bring it. All of it. Without apology. Without comparison. Without the internal ranking system that says my way of loving is probably not as good as someone else's. Bring what you have. Pour it out. And let the fragrance fill the room. Here is the simplest thing this story has been saying. Across all the evenings in Bethany, across the dinner, and the argument, and the silence, and the tomb, and the perfume, you are allowed to sit down. Not permanently. not irresponsibly. Not in the way that abandons the people and the work and the life that genuinely need you, but in the way that Mary sat down, deliberately, without guilt, without one eye on the kitchen. You are allowed to stop, occasionally, and simply be in the presence of the one who loves you, not as a function, not as a provider, not as the person who holds things together and makes sure everything is right. Just as yourself. Just as the person whose name has already been said. Twice. Slowly. With full attention and complete acceptance. You are allowed to receive. This is harder than it sounds for people like Martha. And there is more Martha in most of us than we would like to admit. Receiving feels passive. Receiving feels like you are not contributing. Receiving feels, if you have spent a long time defining yourself by your usefulness, slightly uncomfortable, like wearing clothes that do not quite fit. The familiar posture is giving, managing, providing, moving. But the tree cannot give what the roots have not first received, and you cannot pour out what has not been poured into you. Mary understood this. Perhaps she understood it not through reasoning, but through something more immediate. A natural inclination towards stillness that led her, again and again, to the same place. To the feet of someone who had something real to offer her, and the wisdom to simply receive it. And what poured out of her, when it finally poured, the perfume, the tears, the complete and uncalculated gift of herself, came from a place that was full, that had been quietly, steadily, consistently filled by all those hours of sitting and listening and receiving what only that presence could give. So tonight, this particular night, this quiet that has found you at the end of a day that was its own accumulation of demands and responsibilities and things you gave to people who needed them, tonight is an invitation. Not to figure anything out. Not to resolve anything. Not to prepare for tomorrow or process today or organize your thoughts into something coherent and manageable. Just to sit down. In whatever way sitting down looks for you right now. In the weight of your body settling into the surface beneath it. In the slow loosening of the places where you have been holding tension without quite realizing you were holding it. In the gradual dimming of the interior monologue that has been running since you woke up this morning. Tracking everything that needed doing and everything you did and everything still undone. Just let it all slow down. Like the pace of a story told in the dark. Like the rhythm of breathing that has nothing left to manage. Like the long exhale of a day that is finished. Imagine, if you like, that you are in Bethany. Not the Bethany of grief and sealed tombs and 4 days of silence. That is not where this story ends. The Bethany of the last evening. The one with the lamp burning on the low table. The smell of bread that Martha made. The sound of voices speaking quietly in the way of people who are glad to be in the same room with each other and are not trying to fill the air with anything beyond that gladness. Lazarus is there, alive, and eating, and saying ordinary things in the way that living people say ordinary things. and the ordinariness of it is still, to his sisters, faintly miraculous. It probably always will be. Martha is moving between the table and the kitchen in the particular rhythm of someone who has found her way back to the simple pleasure of the work. Not anxious, not comparing, just present in her moving the way a river is present in its moving. Because this is what it does, and the doing of it is enough. And Mary is at his feet. She is always at his feet, not because she has nowhere else to be, or because the alternative is beyond her, but because she has chosen it. Again, deliberately, as a choice that requires something from her, even when it looks like nothing. The choice to release what could be managed and sit with what simply is. The choice to receive before she gives. The choice to be filled before she pours. She is sitting in the fragrance of what she poured out. The whole house smells like it. You can smell it from the doorway. You can probably smell it from the road. Let your eyes close, if they have not already. Let the story settle around you like the kind of quiet that has substance to it. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of stillness, which is its own thing, its own texture, its own quality of rest. You have been Martha today. In whatever ways you have been Martha today. The preparing and the providing and the managing and the moving, all of it real, all of it given from a place of genuine love, all of it received by someone who sees exactly what it costs and what it means. And now you are Mary. Now you are sitting down. Now the one thing that is needed is the one thing you are already doing, which is simply this: being still in the presence of someone who is here, who has always been here, who was here in the busy afternoon and here in the 4 days of silence and here at the edge of the sealed stone and here in the evening of the perfume and here right now. In whatever room you are in whatever night is outside your window, in whatever particular combination of tired and grateful and unresolved and at peace you are currently carrying, He is here. You do not have to do anything about that. You do not have to respond to it or organize it or make sure it is being properly acknowledged. You can just let it be true. He is here. Your name has already been said. Twice. Slowly. With every letter meant. The night is very deep now. The kind of deep where the whole world seems to have agreed, simultaneously, to release the day and let it go. Where the darkness is not heavy but soft. The particular softness of a darkness that has been warmed by the presence of people who love each other. In a room where bread was made and perfume was poured, and someone who was lost came home. Let your breathing do what it already knows how to do. Let your body be as heavy as it wants to be. Let the thoughts that are still moving slow down to the pace of water finding its way downhill. Unhurried, following the path of least resistance, not trying to get anywhere in particular, just moving gently in the direction gravity is already pointing. There is nothing left to prepare, nothing left to manage, nothing left to prove. Only this, only here, only now. Only the quiet fact of being in the presence of someone who does not need you to be more than you are, who has, in fact, been waiting all evening for you to finally sit down. Not because the sitting down is more valuable than the serving, but because you are more valuable than what you produce. And he would like you to know that. In the quiet, in the dark, in the last good hour before the morning. Sleep well. You are known. You are loved. And you are already exactly where you need to be.